Good morning. I was told in no uncertain terms that I should start the morning by letting you all know that Emily Brandt is my daughter, so that you would feel like I was one of you. And I'm told she's listening online, so hi, sweetheart. It's a pleasure to be here this morning and see a number of people I haven't seen for a while. Gordon, Kristen, I think I've known almost 15 years. We served on board together shortly after I moved to Kansas, so I couldn't tell you anymore which one it was, but nice to see her again. And Chuck, when I lived in Chicago for 5 years before moving here and led a very worldly and shallow life and desperately trying to reconnect with my faith, and Chuck was a phenomenal mentor to me, so I'll always remember that. I want to ask you two questions to start the message this morning. How many of you in this room are landowners, property owners? A number of you. How many of you, for the second question, could go to some point, any point on your property, and be able to completely lose sight of the things of man? No utility poles, no roads, no crops, nothing at all. Couple of hands, okay. I'll tell you why I asked that question in a second. But for those of you who don't know me well, I will tell you right off the bat, I am not a vacation person. Just the thought of having to go lay on the beach in Hawaii for a week doing nothing just absolutely sends shivers up my spine. In fact, when Jill and I got married, she knew this, of course, and so she planned our honeymoon around staying at an Amish bed and breakfast in Lancaster, where we could make cheese and herd cattle and build buggies. I think otherwise she was afraid I wouldn't go on the honeymoon with her. So, of course, knowing this about myself, when I lived in Chicago, I used to save up my vacation time, and I would use it to do some kind of a short-term service trip. And my request was always the same: send me somewhere, no cities, no cell service, maybe somewhere out in the rural West where I can just be alone. And I think it was on the first of these trips, so it might have been the second, but I was sent out to Drift Creek Camp in Oregon, in the middle of Siuslaw National Forest. I mean, you don't want to talk about disconnected. And in my conversations with the camp director leading up to this trip, she told me, you're going to be remodeling one of the cabins here on camp, and so since you're going to be spending your entire day in this cabin anyway, you might as well just sleep there as well. That way you'll have a mattress, you'll have a shower. And I was like, mattress, shower, what is this, the Ritz-Carlton? I mean, can we get some rustic going on here? And she said, well, if you'd like to, you can bring a tent with you, and there's a trail that leads out the back of camp, and you can hike back on the trail and see if there's something back there that suits your fancy a little bit better. So that's what I did. I got to camp, and I got on the trail, and I started hiking back, and about a 10-minute hike back on this trail, I found kind of a flat spot. It was several yards off the trail, kind of in an oxbow of the creek, and it looked rustic. It looked quiet enough for my tastes. So I started setting up my tent, and as I did, I was just kind of looking around, and I realized that from this rather arbitrary spot that I had chosen, I could not see a single sign of human civilization. There were no signs indicating the trail. No utility poles, no roads, no planes flew overhead. There was the creek, there was dirt, there were trees. That was it. It was just me and God. And I sometimes get frustrated, maybe some of you do as well, that we don't hear God quite the way the Bible talks about. I've never been in front of a burning bush. I've never seen a pillar of fire in the night sky. But in the solitude of that spot, I think to this day was the closest that I have ever come to hearing God's voice in my life, when you remove all those distractions. And I think that's the reason to this day that I'm so intrigued by this idea of wilderness. And when we think about wilderness, there's kind of two, I think, very diametrically opposed visions of what wilderness is. And this is true not only of the Bible stories like today's, but also just in literature and storytelling for thousands of years. Option one, wilderness is this dark, uncharted place. It's full of fear, full of chaos. It's a place where the worst aspects of our psyches go to hide from polite society. And it kind of symbolizes, I like to think of as a boundary between the world that we know and this this world of danger and mystery. And then this symbolism, entering the wilderness, means leaving predictable rules of society behind. If you think about, if any of you remember, as I barely do, textbooks from 5th, 6th, 7th grade, and you'd see these pictures of early maps drawn in the 11th, 12th, 13th centuries. And any place where Europeans had not yet gone, they would draw demons, they would draw sea monsters, right? And I think partly they did this because they said, well, if we haven't been there yet, then clearly there's nothing important. But more importantly, I think they did it kind of as a warning to the rest of the world that if you were so reckless as to venture off of the beaten path, then you were taking your life into your own hands. I kind of think of it as the Grimm's fairy tale approach, right? Because the woods, the wilderness, the darkness, that's where the witches are, that's where the goblins are, that's where the wolves are. And sadly, wilderness of this type can exist inside of our children too. It's not just an external phenomenon. It's not just a physical place where we go. Unlike most of us when we were their ages, children deal with the issues of social media and the ease that it creates and comparing themselves to their friends. Even if we don't realize it or maybe we think they're too young to see, our children deal with shifting relationship dynamics. They feel the deep divisions of our political world. They see news stories about the latest tragedy, whether natural or man-made. And as this happens day after day after day, these moments for which they have not yet built up coping skills start to wear on them. Because for all they know, those demons, those wolves, exist just outside of their front doors. And they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to escape it. Luckily, there's also the second side of wilderness, option 2. Because in those same fairy tales and often in Bible stories as well, the wilderness can be a realm of transformation and growth. It's a place of testing us. It's a place of finding purification. It's a place where we may encounter healing and divine revelation. Stepping into the wilderness might be the start of our hero's journey, the place where we confront our fears and where we find our inner strength, where we experience profound change or maybe uncover a hidden truth that alters our destiny forever. How many of you have seen Finding Nemo? Right? Love that movie. He goes to the other reef and his dad and his friends are like, no, don't go. But he does, right? And he finds his strength and he comes back a hero. I love that movie. So when you read in the Bible about people being led into the wilderness, whether it was the Israelites or Jesus or John the Baptist or Elijah or Moses at the burning bush, I have to confess that as a kid I always kind of assumed that wilderness was really about the only thing that was available to people back then. I've never been to Israel. I've never been to the Middle East, but from my rather myopic middle-class American viewpoint, I just picture vast swaths of Syria and Iran and Turkey and Egypt as little more than sand dunes. But preparing for the message today, I did a little bit of research. I did learn that the Babylon of the Old Testament probably housed about 100,000 permanent residents. So, okay, city, I'll give them that. But I also learned that it was about the only population center in a region larger than the entire state of Texas. So in other words, leave the city boundary, walk in any direction for days, for weeks on end, and every single step you take is in the wilderness. So for me, that begs the question, if that is the case, then why does God tell us specifically to go into the wilderness? He could have just said, step outside your tent. Boom, wilderness. And I think for me, as I read a lot of these stories, the intent always seems to be the same. God is using that wilderness as a place of testing us. He's using the wilderness as a place to reveal himself to us and to demonstrate his presence and his power. It's a place or season to create transformative growth within us. And isn't that what we want? Not just for ourselves, but for our children, for our grandchildren? For many of us, well, actually I shouldn't say that. For me, the first time I arrived at Camp Menasca, Not going to lie, it felt a little wildernessy. I got out of the car and I saw dry, sandy soil and I saw sparse, parched grass. I didn't see the amenities that many of us have come to take for granted. You know, there was no air conditioning, no electricity in the cabins, no Wi-Fi. And in a setting like this, kind of forces us to step outside of our comfort zone. I think for a lot of people, just being on or in the 240 acres of Camp Menasca might feel a little bit like a sacrifice at first. And for the hundreds of kids whose first exposure to Camp Menasca is the 2 months of summer when it's at its driest and its hottest, it might feel like a little bit of a test of faith. And yet, even in that setting, we know that God provides. Through the benevolences of churches throughout the area, the support of retreats that are held there throughout the year, from individual and household support, God continues to provide for Camp Menasca just as camp seeks to provide for your children. But as we're told in Exodus 16 about God only providing quail and manna for the Israelites after they complained, in other words, making them work for it a little bit, making them suffer a little bit, Camp Menasca also has to work for the opportunities that God provides for us. As many of you know, of course, for years, Western District supported camp financially, and so we didn't have to do much. But in 2012, Camp Menasca became its own separate organization, giving us new freedom, to be sure, which is great, but it also removed kind of the safety net that we had enjoyed for many years. The retreat center that was dedicated in 2001 was intended as a way of supplementing our income during the 10 months of the year when summer camps were not being held. But of course, when the boiler blew at that center a few years ago, the retreat center effectively became unusable, and the opportunities for that additional income dried up. Placed us in a very difficult time, and that's why I was brought on board to help raise the money to get that retreat center back up and running. The problem was, I'm not sure camp did a great job of maintaining communication to all of our congregations. I think when that whole situation first happened, we went out and we said, this has happened, please give us money. And then we took your money. And I'm not sure we were as forthcoming or as transparent as we needed to be about what has been happening the last couple years. Fortunately, I'm very pleased and proud to be able to stand in front of you today and say that over the last 6 months, I personally watched the retreat center go from stud walls to clean carpets and lights installed and furniture moved in, and days away from professional certifications that legally allow us to put people in that building again. And it's happened very quickly, and I'm very proud of that. I didn't do it, I'm not going to lie. I wish I could take the credit, but I can't. Many of you probably know Tom Gaddard, who has served as our volunteer coordinator for the last 8-9 months. And he's done a phenomenal job of coordinating volunteers and making sure that the work that needed to be done was being done. And so I'm proud to be able to sit with donors now. And when they say, what's happening with the retreat center? Is progress being made on the retreat center? What's new with the retreat center? I finally have a good answer, and that feels really good. Because my job, of course, at camp is just to ensure that camp survives, that camp has the ability to bring in revenue throughout the year as we're open. But my goal is very different from the goal of leadership, because the goal of leadership is to ensure that Camp Menasca remains a place that provides hope and healing to our kids, provides kids the chance to grow in their faith, just as many of you probably grew in your faith there, and provide the opportunity for those divine encounters that I just mentioned, the same encounters that many of you have enjoyed over the last 75 years. When your children and grandchildren step into the wilderness of that dry, sandy soil, they too are stepping into a boundary. They're stepping into a boundary between who they are and who they have the opportunity to become. When we realize that these computers in our pockets are largely useless in a cabin that doesn't even have a light bulb, we know that our children will look for the light elsewhere. And Camp Menasca's job is to ensure that they find that light. That light is found in the made-from-scratch meals that our volunteers provide. That light is in the talented volunteers and staff who play and sing songs so that the children can sing next to friends new and old. And that light is unquestionably in the warm orange rays of evening campfire. Our children's internal wilderness of darkness and chaos has the opportunity to be transformed at Camp Menasca. They're given the freedom, they're given the support, they're given the understanding to launch their own hero's journey. And as a parent, that's kind of hard for me to say, because I'd love to think that my girls always felt the love and support to find who they were going to be. But I also have to grudgingly acknowledge that the rules and the structure and the routine that they experience at home for 51 weeks out of the year is very different than the freedom that they find to explore who they are on the trails and in the cabins of Camp Menasca. The Hebrew word for desert, midbar, shares a root with the word medbar, which means to speak. So linguistically and culturally, the two seemingly not connected ideas of being in the wilderness and God speaking to us are connected to one another. Whether that's at the Oregon forests or from the burning bush or from the cabins of Camp Menasca. So I would just urge you that the next time you visit camp and all you see is dry, sandy soil and tall grass prairie, just remember that it's also a place for your children and your grandchildren to hear God's word and to be transformed. Amen.